Hmm. Good, thanks. I always forget that.
I know.
All right. I'll just open the meeting and make some introductions here. Welcome everybody. This is an edition of the CEO Roundtable quarterly all hands program. And as most of you know, in addition to our monthly group sessions, we convene around a topic every couple of months like this. And this time we're examining the non-financial aspects of big life transitions. And I'll say more about that in a minute, but first I'll make these introductions. I'm delighted to say there's now 5 of us in the CEO Roundtable team. Our newest member is Stephanie Cord Miller, who joined us in December as Manager of Membership and Operations. Her mission is to make current members happy and to help us find a few more who fit well in our groups. Christine Laughlin is responsible for venues, catering, and communication so that we have a great environment in which to meet each month. And thank you for that, Christine. Next is Dan O'Brien and Ryan Thomas. They're 2 longtime members who've successfully sold and exited their businesses, and they've since become group leaders for the Roundtable. And you'll hear more about them in a minute because they're part of the panel in the discussion we'll have today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Lewis, and my job is to help Stephanie, Ryan, and Dan curate our roundtable groups to make sure we get the right people in the room each month. And finally, I'd like to introduce you all to Carol Bergeron. Carol is an executive coach, consultant, board director, and leader based in Concord, Massachusetts. And her mission is to guide individuals, teams, and organizations through challenging transitions. A focus for her has become what might be called the non-financial aspects of retirement, one of the biggest transitions we might make in our lives. In constructing this discussion, we recognize that retirement planning, especially the non-financial part of it, is not big on everybody's radar screen, but I suggest that it should be at least a factor in the decisions you make, even at early stages of your journey. But retirement isn't the only transition in our lives, and we can expand the discussion into intra-career transitions like we might experience after an exit, termination, or failure of a startup, all of which have happened to me. When these events do begin to loom large, we're of course focused on crossing the finish line, cashing the check, or clearing out our desk. We don't have the time or energy to think about the first day we wake up in our new life. This topic is dear to me. I sold my first business when I was 32, and I was surely not prepared for the emotional consequences. It took me fully 2 years to mourn the loss of identity, to rediscover who I was, and to find meaning in life again. The stress of all of that contributed to the end of my first marriage. In just a minute, I'll hand things over to Carol to get us started. She'll take a couple of minutes to introduce the topic from her point of view, and then she'll hand off to Dan, who will tell us about his experience, and then Ryan, who will do the same. Then we'll open the floor for questions, and we'll ask you to share your own experiences. Stephanie and I will be watching the raised hands, and I will call on you in turn. And I know we won't have more time than to scratch the surface here, but I hope the discussion will help you put this topic somewhere on your radar screen as you make decisions for a future that will come all too fast. Take it from me. Carol, would you like to start off?
Sure, would love to. First of all, I'm Carol Bergeron, and I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me to join the CEO Roundtable this morning. And as Scott mentioned, I'm really passionate about helping individuals, teams, and organizations successfully take on life's greatest transitions. And selling or exiting a business as CEO is just one type of major life transition. Okay. And that transition can really provide you, first of all, it's a remarkable achievement. And secondly, it also provides a whole variety of positive outcomes for each of you personally, providing probably financial freedom that perhaps leaves you to invest in other ventures, do more travel, retire comfortably if that's where you are in your career. It affords you greater freedom in your time to pursue other things, maybe other employment, starting another company, taking a little hiatus, spending time with family. It contributes to your legacy in a very meaningful way because your business is continuing under the ownership of someone else. And it's cause for celebration. Okay. Launching, growing, and selling a business is something to absolutely celebrate. But that whole process of managing the exit of the business while simultaneously managing the business as usual to that high stellar level of performance that you want it to be can really leave even the savviest CEOs a little bit ill prepared for that next segment of life, if you will. And so some of the shifts in your new life may prompt you to encounter some emotional, social, and lifestyle challenges that you had not expected. And I want to walk through a few of those right now, but I want to preface it by saying not everyone will experience every challenge that I'm about to talk about. And the degree to which you experience them, if you do, will vary from person to person. But the value of this is just to be aware of them so that if you do have some of these experiences, you know where they're coming from. And that puts you in a first step, better position to manage them. So the first bucket of challenges are more on the emotional side. And for CEOs or business owners who have identities that are deeply rooted in their careers, they could experience a diminished sense of self and just simply miss the meaning and purpose of the role that the CEO role gave them. Okay. And a lot of times that may prompt them in their new life post exit to return to what's familiar, starting a new business or going for employment without really considering any other options. Okay. Another emotional component that you might encounter could be a little bit of guilt about the uncertainty that remains with your employees, customers, or even your business partners as part of the business, right? So there's a variety of emotional components that may surface. In the area of social, well, if you're very heavily tied, your identity tied to your business, it may also be that your professional network has also served as your social network. And as you move on from your business, those relationships can change or even subside. And that could prompt a little bit of feeling of isolation. Okay. And then on the lifestyle standpoint, is that without really taking some time out to think through and design your next phase or next chapter in life, you might encounter one or two different extremes, if you will, in your lifestyle. On one extreme, you might underschedule your activities. Come on. Free of the alarm clock at last, right, may prompt you to want to do things that are much more spontaneous and go with the flow from day to day. And if that carries on for a long period of time, might mean that when you wake up every morning, there isn't so much meaning and purpose to jumpstart you, if you will, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you could overschedule yourself. Okay, and what that might look like is that the quantity of activities actually exceeds the quality of activities that you're involved in, and that may prompt a little bit of stress in your life. And we're not going to talk about the financial challenges, but there may be a few of those as well. So those are some of the emotional, social, lifestyle types challenges that you may actually encounter. But the good news is there are a couple of frameworks that I want to walk through that will position you to proactively think about them and at least start to put some things in place so that you're making the most of your time when you move into your next life. So what I want to show you is, and let me share just a quick slide with you. Okay, and thumbs up, everyone can see that? Yes, beautiful. Okay, so this is a retirement life design journey that I use. Don't let the topic retirement fool you. This is really about redesigning your life after a major transition in life, and exiting your business is one of those types of transitions. So it may very well be you're not retiring, but you're moving on to something else. But the principles remain the same. So the proactive approach is to go through a journey like this, where you really start to reevaluate, starting with and answering the question, well, who are you now? Okay, and this serves as a baseline or your starting point A before you actually move into your new life. And you may have done some of this kind of work. If you've ever worked on your identity, your personal brand, your executive brand, some of the output from that thinking could be of tremendous value when you're answering this question, who are you now? Okay. The next two phases of this proactive approach to recreating your life has more to do with how you spend your time. Okay, what are the activities that you choose to include? And here, when creating it, I like to use the funnel approach, right? Where you start big and broad and come up with a list of a variety of activities that you would consider doing in your next phase of life. Okay. But the reality is there's only so many hours in a day. And so the chances of you're fitting all of those in might be a little bit challenging. So the types of activities I would urge you to think about are those that might speak to your mind, body, and spirit. Because quite honestly, what I hear from a lot of coaching clients is when things get really busy, those are the activities that tend to get backburnered sooner than others. Okay, and activities that bring you energy, meaning, purpose, and activities you might select just because they bring you joy, just for the sheer joy of it, right? So as you go through the funnel, you'll start to prioritize what is the right mix of those activities that really speak to you. And here you're trying to strike the right balance of quality and quantity of activities. Okay. Now, when you move into the fourth phase of this journey, with whom will you spend your time? And it cannot be understated how important your peeps are, right? Is who's in your network, who are your peeps that are going to support the life you've chosen to build for your next chapter. Okay. And that may, excuse me, when you look at your activities, it may prompt you to strengthen relationships that already exist, perhaps with friends and family or what have you, because that supports the activities that you want to partake in. But it also may mean you have to build a new network, right? So let's say you want to start mentoring, other CEOs or people in your area of discipline, whatever that discipline might be. Well, you may need to develop a new network to figure out how to go about doing that. Right? And in the off chance that part of your life change were, for instance, to include relocating, well, now there's another whole layer of figuring out, do you have a network local to you that's really going to support your life design? Something even as simple as, hey, if you like to go on out and walk, brisk power walk, for instance, with a neighbor. Well, if you relocate, you need to figure out in your new neighborhood who that's going to be, right? So there's a lot baked in on who are you going to spend time with so that really supports your new life design. Okay. And then finally in this phase is who will you become? And when you figure out who will you become, this will give you an overall vision that serves as your North Star to make future decisions. Because even in your next chapter, you're going to have a whole host of transitions that go on. Okay. And so by clarifying your personal vision on what you want to happen, that's going to help you make future decisions when you do have to make some adapt to changes in what's going on. And plus, we help you come up with a really snazzy new elevator pitch that you might use at the block party after you reach your next phase. Okay, so this is an overall approach to redesigning your life, and it is iterative in nature. So you might get your arms wrapped around some of the activities and then the relationships and go back and forth a little bit. So it does take a little time, but trust me, it's well worth the time. And what I'd like to do is just show you that another model, if you will, because remember, we started out saying that selling your business and managing the exit process can be very consuming. And it could be that you don't have sufficient quality time to dedicate to creating this journey before the exit. So I'm going to give you an alternative plan B, if you will. You'll still do this, you'll just do it at a different point in time. Okay. And that is to understand about transitions. Any kind of transition in this kind of instance starts with an ending. So think about other past transitions you've had in your life. You got married, you got divorced, you started to have children, or you graduated from college and started a brand new job for the first time, right? Well, all of those transitions in life start with an ending, and a lot of emotions can surface as a result of that. And so it's important in your transition planning to think about, well, how am I going to manage that loss? And what am I going to carry forward with me? And ways to do that are celebrating your past accomplishments and then moving forward. Okay. The second phase of a transition is a neutral zone. And this is characterized by trial and error, right? And so after whatever it is that's ended, you move into the neutral zone. And now you're starting to try out a variety of different things. And some of them will stick, some of them won't, but there's a lot of trial and error here. But it's so important to stay motivated in this phase, okay? Because it could be that some people get stuck in this phase. They never really get to this third phase of new beginnings, okay? So a lot of personal growth and transformation may occur in the neutral zone, right? Because once some of those activities that you've tried and they resonate with you, then you're going to bake them into the design of your new chapter. And that's when you get to the new beginning segment, right? Is what are the things that you're going to be doing that you're committing to yourself? Because remember, when you exit a business, no one's calling the shots on how and where you're going to spend your time other than you. Okay, and so this is a wonderful opportunity. So I just wanted to describe what transitions look like. And then we're going to shift gears and hear from the panelists and hear about their stories and so forth. And time permitting, we can come back to this and I can share a few tips for you to make sure you integrate them into your transition plan. Right? And your transition plan is, think of it as a temporary plan before you do the work of redesigning your next chapter in life. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I am going to ask Dan a question as one of our panelists, Dan O'Brien. When you think about your CEO transition, selling and exiting the business, share the story. And while you're sharing the story, could you elaborate on what you found to be the most challenging situations or the greatest challenges that you encountered?
So we sold the business during the first year of the pandemic. And so, our structure had changed already. I went from being in the office most of the time, surrounded by team, to working remotely most of the time, on Zoom meetings and such. And so part of that, from my standpoint in the transition, part of that made life easier because I didn't have to pretend nothing was going on, in the office every day because of the process of the sale, negotiating. We were a 50-person, $30 million annual revenue engineering company. We helped people automate manufacturing processes, and we sold to a $4 billion publicly traded behemoth. And although I really like the team that's in charge of the business segment that we were part of, the legal team had far more to do with the transaction than the team that we wound up interfacing with on a regular basis. And by the end of the transaction, I hated their guts. And so, there wasn't really time and energy for much planning about what I was going to do afterwards. I was just going to be, in my mind, I wasn't planning on retiring. I was planning on repurposing, but I hadn't exactly figured out what I'd be repurposing to. So that's sort of the pre part. If you're running the business and selling the business, each one of those things is a full-time job. And so, the idea that I was somehow going to figure out how to, what day one or day 10, probably day one isn't the day you worry about. It's day 40 afterwards, where it sort of hits you that you're not still who you used to be in the kind of the same way. So loss of identity, after the fact, loss of identity was an issue. Meaning and purpose had some play in there. Guilt, a little bit about leaving, the captain abandoning ship, and all the wonderful people that we had on the team are now, they have a new captain and who doesn't care for them in quite the same way maybe that I did. So those were all part of it. I was lucky. Lucky maybe is the wrong word. I got asked to do some consulting projects by companies we had dealt with in the past. And so I immediately, very quickly jumped into traveling about this as much as I used to travel, working about as much as I used to work, which was, not the plan. And meetings, very, very similar to my life pre-sale, except without the authority to actually make things happen. So the plus was the problems I was trying to solve were academic problems for me, not emotional. It was no longer, I was hired by somebody else to help them solve their problems. And so it wasn't quite as personal. The downside was the lack of authority. When you run the business, when you're the CEO, you can just say, here's what we're going to do. When you're a consultant, you don't just get to say, here's what you're going to do. So that, those were the things, personally, lack of deadlines is a problem for me. So I've had to figure out how to create artificial deadlines. That's been a personal challenge, whereas I never had a problem with, motivation or having things done on time in the business. We tend to be a bit of a firefighter in the role of running the business. The problem is when there isn't a fire, what do you do? And once we sold the business, there wasn't a fire, and so I have to sort of create one a little bit. And also the lack of a cleanup crew. When you're the CEO, you've got this whole team that's kind of following you around with a dustpan and a broom, making sure the ideas that you've spewed forth, get some traction. And so suddenly, as a lone ranger, I can have all the ideas in the world, but unless I actually do something, nothing happens. And so those were some of the things. And I don't want to, from a time standpoint, I think I don't want to get touchy-feely necessarily, but one of the things that's been interesting for me is I've gone back, read some of the books I really liked when I was a kid, and sort of reintroduced myself to myself, who I was before I ran a company and had a whole bunch of families dependent on my performance. And so, I'm sort of getting to know who I was at my core a little bit after the fact. Anyway, I don't know if there's any questions or more that I could, my favorite thing is solving problems, and my wife will joke, because if we're at the airport and somebody's having a problem, I have a hard time not getting up and trying to, help them solve their problem. If we're at a restaurant and something's not, I just can't help it. And so figuring out what problems to solve now is a little bit of a, I'm doing some work with the local food pantry, and I'm on the board of the local broadband provider. I live up in Vermont, and so none of the major broadband providers were going to string fiber to every house in the state. And so I'm part of a group that was the first CUD, the first sort of independent ISP with a goal of bringing high-speed bandwidth to every structure in the state. Anyway, I'll wrap there.
Great. And I love the last comments you were making about you're a problem solver. And so how important is it that one of your superpowers, if you will, problem solving, right? You navigated to some activities in your next chapter that really made good use of those skills, right? It might not be for a company that you're running per se, but helping other entities, if you will. Did that just sort of come about, or was that accidental or very deliberate? How did that happen?
I have a hard time saying no. And so somebody asked me to join one board, and then somebody asked me if I would be involved in the food, but it would, my mantra when I ran the business is, if it's in your power to say yes, then don't say no. And so I'm sort of bringing that as well to what I'm doing here. And in very rural Vermont, there are a lot of opportunities to try to make a difference. Right now I'm reading I've just started a book called The Second Mountain. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's about folks who spent their whole lives climbing the mountain, their career, their family, their everything, and now the kids are gone. The dog died. You're finally actually free. What's the next mountain you're going to climb? So working on that.
Oh, sounds like an interesting book. Good read. Thank you, Ryan. We'd love to hear your story and sort of your experiences along the way.
All right. Thanks for letting Dan go first and take all the good stuff. Thanks, Dan. I'll feel compelled to go find a whole bunch of different things now that they'll make a lot of sense. No, I actually did think about stuff in advance, which I usually don't, so it may make it better or worse. But I had a few things that I think there are a lot of things that go through your mind and make your life different. So I try to highlight, I would say the biggest ones are the ones that the ones to look out for, or the ones to sort of keep track of, or the ones that hit me, I would say, harder than others. The first one, in no particular order, is guilt. Like Dan mentioned, I have the guilty personality, and I think one of the things I've really tried to preach to myself and everybody else is know thyself. So everybody's going to handle this differently. Some people are going to be totally fine. So it's just like everybody who handles retirement. Some people swing right into retirement, no problem. They play golf, they do this, they do that. And other people, want to chuck themselves off the nearest bridge after 3 months. And so you have to kind of know what your personality type is headed into it. And so the guilt of, like Dan mentioned, I've been telling these people for years, hard charge, build this company, build this culture, and then, yeah, see you guys later. I mean, that just seems like everything that you've pushed towards, you're now telling people you're bailing out of, right? And the whole CEO entrepreneur is a non-quitter attitude. And I always tell people, like, man, that is such a fine line, the non-quitter attitude, because you need to learn from your mistakes and do things differently. That's not the same thing as being stubborn and quitting, right? Like, it's sometimes entrepreneurs like keep doing the same thing over and over again. And it's like, no, you have to adapt and adjust and get better. That's not quitting. That's that failing and moving forward and fixing it. It's the same thing with your business, right? And so it's not quitting. It's you've reached a goal or a culmination. And I also, when Dan says he loves to solve problems, it's like life is all about solving problems. Literally, it's just one problem after another. But I'm like, I love to let other people solve problems. Like, I learned to do that. Like, it's like, hey, you know what? You take care of this now. And you know what? And it's really good for you. This is, I tried to trick myself, and I do believe it, but I still trick myself into saying, hey, this is really good for your career now, Joe or Jane or Fred, to go do this. Now it's your chance. You now have the opportunity. I'm giving you that gift, right? Like, sometimes you have to trick yourself into letting other people be successful. And it kind of helped me slide out of the way, if you know what I mean. The other big one was, and I know we're not talking about financial here, but I'm a financial focused person. That's how I think about things, because it gives me comfort. I'm a numbers guy. I like to know what the numbers are. So you do have to do a bunch of work around making sure you're all set up there. And because you will not be able to be comfortable unless, like, if you're uncomfortable, that's a good thing, right? Because that means you now know there's a problem that you need to go solve. If you go blazing into it like totally fine, I'm not worried, well, then you should be worried, because I know plenty of people that have gone broke after selling their business, people with $100 million that literally left the keys on the table of a multi-million-dollar house because they couldn't pay the taxes within 10 years. So don't be that person. So there is, that will allow you the freedom to then do all these other things you want to do once you've sort of got that plan built out. So that was really important to me. The other one was, you don't get a chance to think about a lot of the things that you're going to do after, which is, I think, the whole point of this conversation, because you're so wrapped up in the goals of your business. You're like, oh, and you're at your busiest when you're in the process of selling your company or exiting. You're working with your buyer or whatever. You're keeping your people all in check. You're making sure everything looks good. The roses smell good. They're well trimmed and clipped, and all the numbers are in place and all that stuff. And then it abruptly goes the other way. You wake up one day and you're like, I am no longer the boss. And it's a very weird feeling. And in some ways it's very, like, you're relieved, but then when as soon as you hit your first, that's stupid. Why are you doing that? And you're like, oh no, I can't, what am I going to say? I can't tell them to do something differently. And all depends on how your transition goes. If you get bought by private equity and they just take over, or if they want you to run the show. I mean, sometimes you don't even exit, right? You stick around for a while. It really depends on the situation. But for me, I had both senses, one of relief and one of no, like, I don't do that. And that's eventually what caused me to not want to be there anymore, is once they start doing things that you wouldn't do with your own company, and that I can't be a bad employee, so I have to not be here anymore. So mentally you start to prepare for that. And hold on, I had one more. And this is like the big one. To me, this is the big one in life. You just have to learn to be okay with things, right? We all, especially CEOs. And it's funny, I never thought I was a type A personality. I think probably until after I sold my business. I'm like, I'm not type A. And I can let people do things. I don't need to be in control. But then what I realize is, I have no problem with that when everything's going the way it's supposed to go. But when I don't think it's going the way it's supposed to go, then I get anxious and I get annoyed and I feel like I need to say something. And I'm like, oh, okay, you are type A, damn it. So learning to be okay with things are out of your control, and to learn to, when you're in your business, you do what you need to do. I live by the mantra, what does the company need from me? It's not what I want. It's not what makes me happy. It's not what keeps me from getting scared. It's what the decision that the company needs to move its agenda forward has nothing to do with me. I'm the facilitator. And if I cannot make the right decisions for the company moving forward, I should not be the guy running it. And that actually gave me freedom to make the right decisions. And so then you have to then transition that to yourself. Now I get to make those decisions for myself. It's not about what my employees need anymore. They'll be okay. They will be okay. If you did a good job leading up to it and you didn't leave some garbage heap, they'll be fine. They'll have good careers. They'll have good opportunities, right? You set them up to be successful. You'll be there to mentor them or help them. But now you can transition to what makes you happy. And so anybody that's in the roundtable meetings with me knows I ask this all the time. What's going to make you happy? Don't worry about what you think people expect of you or what you feel like you need to do. It's what is going to bring you joy. And so the transition to that is something you have to accept.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. And I love the guilt, the guilt part, and positioning it as a career development opportunity for other people as you start to delegate those tasks. All right. So I have a question for both Ryan and Dan, and either of you feel free to chime in. And that is for the greatest challenges that you faced, and you both, now that you have, the benefit of 2020 hindsight, right? What were some of the things that you did? But when you were actually living through them, would you have done anything differently? Was it 2020 hindsight that lent you that lens, right? Or would would you have done anything differently?
From the standpoint of the
challenges that you encountered. So for instance, if you had loss of identity and, meaning and purpose and that kind of thing, or guilt, you pick which was the greatest challenge to you. Was, as you were living it, what did you find that was most valuable to you in dealing with it? And if you had to do it again, what would you have done?
So from the standpoint of the guilt feelings of leaving the team behind, if I were able to, rewind the clock back to about 5 or 7 years before the transaction, I would have tried to create some sort of a ghost stock or some sort of a program where I could put some value away so that at the time of a transaction, the leaders of the company, my A team, or the folks that I really depended on would have had a chance to make a bigger difference. We did some bonusing, but we hadn't set up anything structural far enough ahead of time that it could make a life difference really for any of the folks. And that's something I would go back and I would spend more time trying to figure that out.
And did that come up as an issue after the fact? Was it?
No, it hasn't been an issue for anyone except for me.
For you. Okay.
Just the we were very much an all for one and one for all group. And now I get to, live on a farm in Vermont, and they're all still, fighting the fight.
Mm-hmm.
So you feeling guilty, Dan, that you maybe should have spread the love around a little bit more? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we spread the love around all the time, right? And so kind of it was, well, we've already done so much. My favorite things were when paying for somebody's advanced degree or help, like we had a very rich benefit plan. We, if somebody wanted to go to school, we paid for it. If, as long as they did well. So we had a bunch of folks who got their advanced degrees while working at the company. We had the best health insurance you could have. Some of those things have changed a little bit since now they're part of a publicly traded entity with, thousands of employees. Anyway, so yeah, there were a few people on the team who I still feel like I could have done more for.
Yeah, you could always go back now and put their kids through college.
Yeah, I got 7 grandkids right now that are on the list ahead of the folks who worked at Gibson.
There you go.
Okay. Great.
I don't suffer from it all the time. It's just one of those things that I didn't anticipate, right?
Yeah.
It was, and it's funny because it was just this past weekend I was talking to my wife about it. She said, "Why, has somebody said something?" I said, "No, nobody said anything. I grew up Catholic, so I'm guilty about something."
Right.
Okay.
Guilt.
Could I make a comment?
Yes, Sarah.
So we're setting up a stock option pool because I'm in the process of getting organized to sell in the next year or two. And so it's specifically in my case for the number two. And so I'm actually he's gonna get 10% of the net proceeds when I sell it because I think he's been with me through all these years. He's basically running the company. He's going to become the president. I need him to stay. And I also think he deserves it. So there are ways of doing it. And if I wanted to, spread it to other people, I could. In my case, he's the only person who's an appropriate candidate for that. But it's not that hard to do if you do it ahead of time, as Dan's saying.
Right. And unfortunately for me, it would have been like 4 people, and then all of a sudden you're talking about a lot of money, and and it begins to be harder, especially if you hadn't been planning for it all along.
Right. So what you're saying is plan it in advance.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And doing it as an incentive to hang in there through the transition, which is, often is not fun, is a good pretext for teeing that up.
We never had a non-competes, right? We always just thought it was our job to take care of people in such a way that they wouldn't want to leave. And a couple of key folks, the new entity wanted them to sign non-competes. And so we bonused them enough money so they could live for the time of the non-compete without working. And, that was those were the kinds of things that I didn't think about ahead of time.
Okay. So I'd like to bring it back to some of the challenges that we talked about, the more on the emotional, social, and lifestyle kinds of challenges that you encounter, right? What was the most surprising thing to you? It just completely took you off guard, Brian or Dan?
I'm waiting for Ryan. I'll give him a chance to go first. So
Yeah. I want to answer the last question. Can I answer the last question? I was thinking about that.
Oh, answer good. We'll go back to the last question.
All right. Well, it'll be quick.
Okay.
Because like I said, I would have spent a little bit more time envisioning what my future looked like, and the things that I really wanted to do. And because you just don't really spend a lot of time doing that when you're wrapped up in what you're doing. So sit back and think about, hey, what's going to make me happy? What makes me happy now? Where and how can I start to, same way you would envision the future of your company when you're doing your yearly meetings and you're figuring out where do we want to be next year in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you inherently, probably all of us as kind of people running companies, then start to go back and put the building blocks together to kind of work our way there. As one of my clients used to tell me all the time, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I was like, I kept thinking about that over and over again with break out the map. Well, what does it matter if you don't break out the map if you don't know where you're going, right? Because it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So it starts to get you on the road. So if you whatever it is that you enjoy, if you want to play golf or, whatever, like you can start to go work your way into that a little bit, at the very least mentally, if not actually physically, so that it's not as much of a jolt. When you don't wake up the next day and go, what am I going to do today? And I'm like, you know what I mean? You have a little bit more idea of what you're at least going to try, right? And I always say, everybody, you have any decision you make, you have the absolute right to change your mind at any point in time. So just make a decision and try it and see what happens. And it's like what you encourage people in business too, is don't be too tight and stagnant, right? Try things.
So what other things did you try that maybe you glommed onto and continue? And conversely, what are the things that you tried that you just said, it was an interesting experiment, but not for me?
Well, personally, and this is where I might be different than other people or the same. I don't know. I talked to a lot of people in the process that had gone through it and just said, hey, what do I expect? And and they all basically said the same thing, which is just not my personality. They said, oh yeah, I took a year off. I went to the movies and every day and like hung around. And then I got so sick of it that I went back to work, started another company, whatever. And I didn't do that. I kind of immediately I stayed to the Roundtable. I immediately started doing a little like business coaching and really, really liked it. So it kind of built a an amount of work each week that I'm comfortable with while still giving me free time. But the biggest thing I didn't realize going in, and I think everybody here that I talk to and work with will understand this and hopefully laugh when I say this, is getting to be involved enough with other people's businesses makes me realize I do not want to go back into business. So it was actually a very wonderful, it was perfect. It was like, I get enough of a taste of it. When I hear people like their employee problems and this and that and had a tough year last year, I'm like, I have no desire to jump back into that. This is good enough. And so it actually worked out perfectly for me, as opposed to where I probably would, if I was completely removed from it, be jonesing for it and miss it and miss the adrenaline rush. And then I'd be right back in it and be miserable. And, I don't want to be miserable. So that worked out well for me. I don't know how that would translate to other people though.
Oh, go ahead, Hans.
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, Dan. No, I just thought I'd throw something into the mix here, that I think that this whole conversation, there's an element to this that we haven't really brought in, which is, at what age are you selling your business? Scott talked about selling the business in his early 30s. I was past retirement age when I sold mine. And I think that has a big impact on, what it is that you want to do that you find fulfilling afterwards. I was glad to be away from sort of having a busy schedule with calls and conferences and meetings and all this kind of stuff. Because I pretty much, I have no desire to go back to that. So that made things a lot easier. And but I think that for someone who's young, if they're fortunate enough to be able to sell their business when they're in their 30s, 40s, or even Ryan, who's a couple decades younger than me, I feel like he's probably got a much greater need than I do to kind of, keep his hands in the pot and keep stirring. Whereas I'm sort of thinking, well, I've got a limited time left before my health goes on me, probably. What are the things on my bucket list at this point that I want to do? So it's kind of a different scenario for me.
Well,
I was going to say one of the surprises that I hit was how quickly I rebuilt a life very similar to my pre-sale life. Like the consulting became very much like my work, prior to the consulting, and the muscle memory of that being how I arranged my time happened without me really thinking about it. And it was luckily my wife, after about a year and a half of it, kind of tugged me on the sleeve and said, I thought you had other stuff you wanted to do. And that really was a bit of a reminder that, I wasn't looking for a full-time job. Ryan mentioned, he just busy enough. And that, we were lucky enough to move to Vermont, 190 acre, former farm property. I spend more time on a tractor than I do commuting. And so it's I get to do what I love to do, and engage in a non-full-time way in helping problem solve.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll point out, both of these guys maintained their relationship with the Roundtable, and so that provided a bridge, I think, and a bit of a social network that they had developed over the time.
Yeah,
we have a question on the chat here. Bradford is asking, what about sitting on a board of directors, and how does that play into the plan?
Yeah, I think, but Dan, you probably do that, right? I've considered it. I haven't done it before, so I don't know if I would be down in it enough to be able to do the kind of stuff that I like to do. You know what I mean? Like, I think I might want to be one level down than board of directors in terms of working with people, maybe talking to the leadership team of some companies with the CEO and kind of digging into some of the problems a little bit more than the board does. But I don't know. I haven't been on a board, so I don't know if they get into that level of detail or not. I know, Dan, you do board stuff, don't you?
I've been on a lot of advisory boards, but I haven't actually been on a board of directors. If anybody's looking for a board member, I'm really curious and interested about it.
Yeah, and there really is a big difference between an advisory board and a fiducial.
Mhm.
And I'd be on advisory boards all day long. That can be fun. I see Jessica smiling there.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to be on a bunch of advisory boards throughout my career. And at one point in time, somebody referred to me as a thought leader, which for a little while I was really proud of. And then I realized a thought leader is just average a little sooner than most people.
Well, if I may, I'm going to throw out an idea that might be helpful. And again, for anyone making a big life transition, and whether it's to retirement or to some other kind of employment situation. For any of you, if you're familiar with the work of Marcus Buckingham, his most recent book is, I forget what it's called, What You Love or Work We Love or something like Love Your Work. And one of the things that we do as part of this process of creating your new life is really doing a deep dive and saying, okay, first, look at all the different experiences that you've had over your life, work and work. And I'm talking about life work, not just professional work. Okay. And jot down, well, what were the 5 that resonated most with you, that really top of mind, like, wow, that was impactful, that, for whatever reason, it was one of the most important kinds of work that you've done. And then what you do for each one of those kinds of work is kind of dissect it. Well, what kind of work were you doing? What problems were you solving? What challenges were you taking on? And another important part is, what superpowers were you using? And if you have enough of these kinds of experiences, you'll start to see a pattern emerge, right? On some similarities, on some of the types of work, or maybe the superpowers that you use that you really enjoy using, or the causes because maybe they benefit certain populations that you feel strongly about, or what have you. And that could shape some activities you take on in the future. And let me give you an example. This gal I knew, she was an IT executive, then moved on to supplier chain management kind of thing, and then on to program management in her career. And now, as she's facing retirement, she wants to add in the cause, the homeless. So what she's thinking about doing as part of her retirement plan is to go work for an entity like the Habitats for Humanity, where she can use her program management and supply chain management skills, which she really loved doing, but in a different way that would benefit a certain population, right? So you can sort of sculpt out these things while making use of what really makes you tick. So I just want to throw that out to Ryan and Dan. Did you have any, aha moments when something like that kind of gelled for you?
I
You
did
may have alluded to a few of them, but Ryan, go for
I
it.
had an aha moment that's it's certainly not contrarian to what you said. But it's certainly a segue. I'm glad you brought that up. And anybody that's been in the roundtable with me has heard me mention this before. But Bob Allard, which most of you guys probably know, recommended a book to us, I don't know, a couple of years ago called From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. And I keep bringing it up over and over again because it's such a good book. And so when you talk about like, oh, your superpowers, well, my superpowers when I was 25 are not my superpowers now at, almost 52. And so I can't hearken back on those days. I try to get the word hearken into every conversation, just, nowadays, and rely on those anymore. And this book is a really good read for those of us that are not 25 or 30 anymore. And I guess, hey, Devin, you don't have to read it yet, but everybody else probably should. Which is like you start, it's that whole, like when you're younger, you have whatever I forget, he's got the 2 terms. One of them's crystallized intelligence. The other one's another one, but they're basically like young person stuff. Like grandpa asks you to program his VCR because he can't do it. And it's not because grandpa is not smart. It's because like your brain changes as you get older and you develop more wisdom and more like emotional intelligence, connectivity. That's why like older people, the chief of the tribe is better at the wisdom and like that kind of stuff than out there hunting bears or whatever it is they do. And so you have to kind of go from one strength to the other, and you can't think that you're still really, really good at the other stuff, or more, or worse, be angry at yourself or think that I'm worthless now because I can't, program like I used to. I used to be a decent software developer, and then I just couldn't do it after a certain amount of time. And it's because I transitioned to running the company and I have to learn to get good at that. And I can't just go back to that. So be good at what you're good at and learn that your brain changes and put those skills to use and be happy with that, which is sort of what you're saying, Carol, in a slightly different way. But it's a great book. Certainly good for those of us that may be feeling the angst of, I'm not as good at that stuff as I used to be. What's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. You know, it's actually, there's a strength that you're building that's different than that.
I want to put in a plug for the board of directors path. I've been on 6 or 7 boards in the last 7 years since I retired from full-time CEO-dom. And I find it's a nice transition. It's much less time involving than being a CEO. One of the things I really like about it is I don't really report to anybody. You know, as a CEO of medical companies, drug companies over the years, I always had a board that was, you know, kind of riding my butt. And, you know, when I felt obligated to do all this stuff and, you know, the board meetings and the updates to the board, all that kind of stuff, you know, I still had a boss, even though I was a CEO. And now as a board member, I don't. And that's really nice. There's fiduciary duty involved, and particularly with public companies, all the committees and stuff, that's less fun. But the nice thing about public company boards is they actually pay you in most cases. And so you can sort of bridge your way into, you know, lower income setting by being on boards, and that can be a nice feature. I like the private boards a little better. I can be, you know, a little more free and direct in how I mentor other CEOs, you know, review their business plans, review slide decks, help with decisions about corporate partnering and acquisition, that kind of stuff. It's really pleasurable. And, you know, the average board takes, you know, maybe a couple hours a week. That's it. And so you certainly can structure your time around doing other things. And you can do a lot of it by, you know, remotely. So it's a nice way to transition. I'm sort of reaching the end of that phase now at age 68, and kind of, you know, wondering about some of the issues that are more of the emotional ones about you know, how do I see myself, what I want to do, you know, after all of that. But it's been a good 7-year run, and I was on a board before I fully retired as well. So
I think Bradford had a question about that, but I want to get to Umar, who raised his hand there on the last topic.
Yeah, I was actually interested in your perspective on your definition of success. We're always thinking about financial independence to be one of the most important goals that one would want to achieve. But after achieving financial independence, how has your definition of success changed?
Great question.
Dan, you take that one.
What?
Ryan, it was for you because you're the finance guy.
All right, I'll answer after. That'll give me a minute to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wasn't the finance guy. I was the maybe emotional leader, the mentor, guide in our outfit. And so, you know, my metric was always don't lose money, right? And so we weren't designed to generate as much profit as possible. We were designed not to lose money as an organization. And you know, so I didn't necessarily judge success as financial, you know, I didn't judge our success based on the financial metrics. As long as we were sustainable, that was the goal, is to run a sustainable enterprise. And so but after the fact, now that is a little bit of a challenge, Umair. You know, I'm trying to do things where I can have some impact. You know, I hope that's you know, that's really ultimately the work for the, you know, so I'm the chair of a board, community board that's purpose for living is to give the community opportunities to get together and have activities and create shared, sort of a shared culture in the small town that we're in. I got asked if I would consider being on the board for the food shelf, and I didn't join, but I said I've got a bunch of ideas, and so we're right now we're working on a pay it forward idea, which is to allow you to go into the local coffee shop, bagel place, and buy an extra coffee and bagel, and it gets left, a little thing gets hung on the wall near the door, so somebody who can't afford coffee and a bagel can come in and grab. So we're working on things where we're trying to make a difference in the community. And so I'll judge success by the kind of impact I have in that, and hopefully, if I do a good enough job in the, my role that I'm lucky enough to have, as a chair of the CEO Roundtable networks, hopefully I can make a positive difference for the members of those groups as well.
Yep, that's nice. Umair, was your question before sale or after sale? Because two very different success criteria.
Well, before sale, most people have financial independence as one of the criteria for defining success. So my question is more of after the fact, that now that you have, achieved that, what does success mean to you today?
To me, it's just two kind of big things: ensuring that I find a way to make sure I'm happy. I think that when you spend too much of your life doing things that's expected of you as opposed to what you want to do, you get kind of in that rut and you keep doing that, and then that's where the guilt comes in. And I'm not doing these things. I should be doing these things, and so you got to figure out what makes you happy and keep asking yourself that and keep pursuing it. And the other thing is, I really get a lot of part of what makes me happy is, so it's all part of that same mantra, is making a difference, like trying to help. Like it makes me feel good to help people. And I realize that when I'm not as wrapped up in it, or wrapped around the axle, as I call it, with the problems personally, I have more clarity, right? We call it being in the weeds, right? When you're in the weeds, sometimes it's really hard. And that's why helping other people whenever I can, whatever it is, advice, whatever, sometimes even lend people money. And you know what I mean? And to do things I think that I can make a difference in their life makes me feel good. And so that makes me happy. So it's really just like, do the things that make you happy.
That's great. Thank you. It's interesting that both of you, kind of commented on something very similar, wanting to help people. And what I'm taking away is that don't wait for retirement or financial independence to be helpful, because it is something that you will want to do at some point in time. Might as well start doing it earlier. So thank you for that. Yeah.
That's good advice. I wish you should have told that to me 5 years ago. Oh, because you're so hell-bent on the goal of your business that you forget to do that.
That's right. That's right.
Other questions? Other thoughts?
So I have a question along the lines of the social aspects. We talked about your networks. You had a professional network and so forth. We have talked an awful lot about the kind of work that you're doing and the meaning and purpose and helping others. But when you think about the relationships that you had before the exit and now what your networks look like, do they look a lot different? And if so, how did that sort of occur?
Dan, you want to lead that one?
It's up to you. I'm trying to take turns.
Yeah. Well, no, go ahead. Fire away.
So, yeah, a lot of my social interaction in pre-sale was tied to folks in my industry, customers, vendors, teammates. And so, it did leave a void, and it was, accentuated by the fact that we sold during the pandemic. And so there weren't, celebrations really, there weren't big get-togethers. And, as part of the transaction. The transaction was a bit of a whimper, as opposed to a celebration. But and now I live in a area with more cows than people, so it's that's been a little bit different. I don't feel like I'm missing a social network. I mean, we have good friends where we are. We have an active social life, and I'm married to my most incredible supporter and friend and partner. So as long as I get to wake up next to her every morning, things aren't too shabby, and so that but they're definitely. I still have interaction with the team, but we're not together in the way that we were together before. I'm a 3-hour drive away from most of the folks that I worked with, and I still go to some trade specific meetings. I'm trying to stay engaged in the things that I was passionate about. I started working at Gibson when I was 27, and sold the company when I was 62. So it was a run.
Yeah. So me, I'll just tell you what I think. I was so happy to be out of the networking with the people that I had to deal with on a daily basis. Not my employees. I like my employees and like the people close to me, but I just got so sick of the, kissing hands, shaking babies, whatever that expression is. And selling for 15 years and smiling at these idiots that you really just don't want to talk to anymore. You're just tired. You know what I mean? Like, you got to play the game. And I was a realist. I was like, I got to do this. And I was so happy to not have to do it anymore. And then I was like, oh, I actually get to spend time with people that I enjoy being around, which is why I spend more time with Roundtable people now, you guys. And like friends, and like I'm down in Florida right now helping my cousin whose mom passed away, like going through her stuff. I get to do that now and like help people out doing, you know what I mean, like kind of more emotionally fulfilling stuff than selling services to people. You know what I mean? I'm so glad that those days are over. So I guess like I wish I could go back all over again. Not that I would do anything really differently, but I guess I would like to go back and, how they say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, or whatever that expression is. Same kind of thing. You surround yourself, you go do the things that you love to do, and you find a job or build a business around that and the people that you love being with. Wow. Like, good for you. If you could figure out how to do that, I commend you. I couldn't. I just started to resent the industry I was in so badly that it was time for me to go. So, I don't know if that's a piece of advice or not, but that's certainly how my networking changed.
Any other thoughts, questions on the emotional component, social or lifestyle, or other dimensions?
I think it's a little bit of, I found it to be a little bit of a surprise that the people that worked for me are not people who reach out to me anymore. I was a relatively benign boss, I think. I had good loyalty inside the companies, but that relationship is one that I think the employees, never really know what to do with in terms of your being their superior in a company setting. And it doesn't translate to being good buddies after you leave the company and retire. I have plenty of sort of contacts and friends and so forth in my life, but they're people that mostly come out of school relationships, or town relationships or hobbies or that kind of thing. They're not the people that I used to work with. And I can call them and say hello and we have a nice chat, but there's not a natural incentive for that to happen. And that's a bit of a surprise if you spend all of your life focused on work and the relationships inside the company and telling people what to do. They don't really want to hear from you, I think, after they don't have to listen to you anymore.
So that bums you out, Walter? You look at that as a negative?
Well, it just points to the importance of having networks and relationships that are other than what you're doing at work.
Yeah, it's funny. I go the opposite way. I look at that as a positive. I think you did your job. They weren't your friends. They're your employees. You should be friendly, but not friends. You built a professional network of people that are now handling their own business, and they don't need to reach out to you and ask you for help all the time or ask your advice, because you know what? You taught them what they needed to know while you were there. So, I mean, I certainly could see like, oh, it sucks not hearing from some people, but at the same time, like, I guess I would look at it as the positive end of it.
Walter, you had a different twist as well, in that sort of after you retired, you relocated, and how did that impact your experience?
Yeah, we were in Boston area, and then we moved to Chicago area, where my wife's family is located. And so, you know, I liked them, but it did kind of pull up my roots in a way. I don't have the community that I had in Boston, work wise or friends wise, or, you know, I'm a frustrated rock and roll star, so there was that also kind of got torn up, and I've been able to replace some of it here, but not most of it, and so that's also, you know, been a challenge to try to figure out how to recreate networks. You know, I could go back to church, but I'm not really a believer, and so I'm not really sure why my wife in particular doesn't want to sit through all of that. You know, it's hard to figure out where to put down new roots at age 68. So.
Yeah, there's so many people also retire and go to, well, where Ryan is, at the Villages or someplace, and I suppose there's an element of community there that you can get involved in, but it's something to think about. Is, you know, if you dream to go, you know, someplace warm or some other place when you retire, something to plan.
I have 1,500 Facebook friends, and some of whom are old girlfriends and old school friends and old, you know, so there's plenty of people to associate with, but it's virtual is, you know, it's a little bit bizarre doing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, I'd be interested in what kind of discussions, for those of you who don't know, Paul runs a bunch of groups, an organization much bigger than our little cohort. But have you had these discussions amongst your groups, Paul? And what do you see?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and it's been a great conversation. Really enlightening, and we're all different. Frankly, since I've met thousands of CEOs over the last 29 years. Nowadays, you know, cycling retirement, I have this conversation with at least one or more virtually every week, and it's helpful. The framework that Carol, you laid out, and things of just getting clarity, because all of us are different. Personally, I'm blessed because I love what I get to do. I'm really privileged, and it already maps out to what I want to do. But it really is just getting what I think all of you have been talking about, is just getting clarity as to what they really want, whether it's family, friends, impact, what kind of life we want to have. And proactively, I think, Carol, you mentioned it's designing your life proactively, just like we typically talk about our visions for our organizations and how do we build a sustainable organization. It's how do we take what we've done and build a thriving, sustainable life that brings joy and hopefully as much impact as possible. But we are all different. So having a conversation, but I do think just a conversation like this, we so often get ideas just by listening to others and and how they're doing, crafting their own lives, because, you know, very, very few of us have it all figured out. I haven't met that person yet.
Amen.
And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, each one of us, what it makes us tick is a little bit different. But, you know, I've found collaborating on ideas, because sometimes if you're stuck inside your own mind and you're creating your life design just with your own mind, it could be a little bit limiting. And so when you open it up to conversation with other people who are maybe contemplating similar kinds of changes, it really can open you up to new ideas, at least to the point of trying them out, right? So we talked about transition planning where, hey, there's a lot of trial and error that goes on in that part, and try them out, and some things will resonate and you'll stick to, and other things will be like, it was fun, but that's not for me for the long term, and I'm gonna shift gears and try something else out, if you will. So encourage that, more conversation. So for those of you who have retired or and sold your business, how often do you get calls from current entrepreneurs or business owners or CEOs who want to hear about your transition? Does that happen?
Once.
Once?
Yeah,
And
it
what
happens.
pearls of wisdom did you bestow on them, Scott?
Discussion that it is a thing. And I had talked about it in a roundtable session, and talked about my journey, and I've kind of done it 3 times. And each time I thought it would get easier, but it didn't necessarily. So I told that story, and one of the guys in the group said, well, let's have lunch and talk about it, because he was contemplating a sale. And he said, I don't know what I'll do. He was 50. I don't know what I'll do when I sell the company. He said, well, that's good that you're thinking about it.
Mhm.
And it's so think about it. And it's, as a consequence, he hasn't sold the company.
Uh,
Oh,
I'll
maybe
add-
not as a consequence, but he has.
right.
I'll add
It's easy to stick with the familiar, right? A little bit easier.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Paul.
I'll just say, reflecting, first of all, CEOs are wired differently. And so I've probably could count on one hand the number of CEOs I know that have happily, eagerly, and and successfully retired in the classical sense of the word. I mean, I think it was, it was Dan, basically mentioned you love to solve problems. I frankly haven't met a CEO yet that doesn't love to solve problems, particularly other people's problems. They're always
Yes.
more fun than their own. So frankly, CEOs can't. I mean, frankly, I remember early on in my last few decades of working with CEOs, so many of them talked about when they started retiring, their spouses would kick them out because they started going home, staying too much at home, and they started running the household. And going, you got to get out of here and do something else because you're driving me crazy. But I do think of 2 things. One is that it's one of those times where we actually give ourselves permission to explore new things that maybe I think Dan, you talked about reading the books you read as a youth. And so frankly, many of us have some dreams or aspirations that we never, we took a different path, whether for making money or whatever.
Right.
And so often it does involve maybe taking what we've done in the past, but actually more about exploring those things we didn't give ourselves permission or didn't have opportunities to explore before. And the other thing, and I know I've been talking with Scott about it, but one of the benefits of the COVID was that, we've actually been able to connect in real time with people outside our normal circles, outside our own geographies. And when it comes time to thinking about how we're designing our future lives, so often it's the second level connections or third level connections. They're doing something that is really relevant. And typically what happens when I'm talking with, the transitioning leaders, they want to explore something else they didn't explore earlier or wanted to and such. And then so reaching out to the network, there are so many connections that we could never have made before. But whether it's industries or boards, I helped one of our members who was a CEO of Jamba Juice. When he retired, he wanted to diversify boards, and so we formed the Directors Academy. And we can connect I mean, between Scott and I, if I knew all the members here and vice versa and had connections, when people are trying to make a transition to meet somebody else in that ecosystem, just to learn how it works or something else, the opportunity is there these days. It can happen.
Yeah.
I think the issue about what happens in the home place is an interesting one. You know, CEOs, I spent all my time worrying about how to run the company, and my wife spent all the time worrying about how to run the household. You know, and then suddenly when you're retired, or you know sold the company, you're thrown into the household, which is not your place, right? You can try to meddle with it, but it can be problematic. I know a number of couples that have, you know, where the husband, I guess, and I'm making this a male-female thing, but I suppose it'd go the other way. That, you know, the working partner ended up spending a lot of time designing travel itineraries. You know, where are we going to go this year in Europe, and what are we going to see? What are we going to do? Where are we going to stay? You know, who's going to rent the car? Da, da, da. And that can be a, you know, I think a useful way for a, you know, a husband or ex-CEO to find things to keep them happy that don't get in the way of what their spouses claim for their territory.
What about hobbies? I find in the conversations I've had with people who are looking towards retirement, or they're giving this opportunity, but they, you know, if you've been able to successfully exit, you have an opportunity to take some of that money and kind of invest it into educating yourself in a new way or exploring hobbies. What hobbies or what kind of education have any of you started to pursue as you think about your transitions?
I'd like to get to that, but I see that Jessica unmuted there on the travel topic.
Good.
Hear from that, and then talk about hobbies.
No, for the groups that we're in, I'm in Scott's Roundtable, and the number of the people here know my story, which is blown right open on LinkedIn this morning. So the new CEO of Lindra's announced this morning, but I've known since October, and I'm in a transition. I am 53 in a few months. Walter, my husband, he's telling everybody, can you just take her away? Because remember, I'm in my house in Lake Placid, and I've had an apartment in Boston for the last 8 years. My husband's been here full-time consulting while I go back and forth to Boston. He's like calling every friend and family, let her reorganize your house. She's arrived and she needs to go. So it's been everything you guys have said. It's funny. I am admiring Dan, and Lake Placid needs a lot of help for the community. And so I'm going to do something like towards the fall. I am taking the summer off. I am traveling, and I've done all the travel itineraries. Walter, we're booked for Alaska in our Sprinter van for August. So all the way down to our anniversary. It's very hard to be a high-performing female coming back into this house. They're all like, why are you up at 4:30 in the morning? It's just when I get up to work out. I don't know. So let's see if we survive 32 years of marriage this summer at our anniversary. Should be okay. But yeah. And I have very close friends that are the CXOs that I've left behind, and they haven't called me once, Walter. So yeah, they've got a new person, and they're trying to figure out how to. Humans are fascinating. They just fall right back in line to the hierarchy. So it's going to be an interesting year for me. I'm not sad yet. I've, you know, run out of resources to have all the travel planned, but I've heard a thread from Ryan, Dan, and Walter, and I've heard a thread, and I guarantee you, my hedge fund people, Ryan, I never want to be on boards with hedge fund people or activist investors. I'm kind of you. So we'll see. We'll see how it all works out.
You can collect things. It's a lot of fun. You know, if you have 150 acres like Dan, you can build yourself a very large car barn and start.
That's true. I have 17, but
trying to emulate Jay Leno, you know, and if you're a little, you know, you can collect guitars like I did, or I have a friend that collects watches. That's probably the maybe not the cheapest, but certainly the least space consuming hobby ever.
Yeah, a lot of issues there. The you know, the changing dynamic in your domestic relationship is important to understand. And I've heard people say, I married you for better or worse, not for lunch. And even in my relationship, I used to have a separate garage with my office above and my workshop and all of that. And so I would literally leave the house and go to work. And I don't see the difference. I'm still above the garage, but I just walk downstairs and I'm in the house. That's a problem somehow.
Yep. Yep.
It's not uncommon to have to sort of to benefit from renegotiating the household responsibilities when a big change like that happens, right? And part of it is, how do you make time for each other, right? Or make time, alone time. You know, what do you do together, and then what do you do separately by design, in addition to, you know, just keeping the household going? How do you divvy that up?
Almost have to create an appointment to be together, because when you're working and you have a schedule, that's looked after. You're only available at, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. or something, whatever it is. But now it could be any time, and so sometimes it is no time.
The current fad is to have houses that have great big common spaces in them. But the downside of that means that you're always in each other's space. Maybe you should, redesign your house, or again, Brian can build another wing.
Yeah.
For us, I
Alright.
think it was a little weird because I haven't been here that much, right? We've traveled, we've relocated so many times. So the transition and moving and all of that, and those aren't really the stress parts. It's really just not living together full time in the last 8 years and being president and CEO for a number of those. You're around the clock. And so when I am here, the deal was that he would take care of all the house stuff. I wouldn't cook, I wouldn't clean, all of that stuff. So for Saturday night, I was listening to my book. He's watching a hockey game. I was literally using my computer as a coloring book, which I've never done. And he goes, "This is not normal." He just sat and stared at me. He's like, "I don't know who you are. You're coloring in a coloring book?" I'm like, "I'm just decompressing." He's like, "Normally you're working right now at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. I don't know what to do with it." And I said, "How about you just stop staring at me and go read a book?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know." He doesn't know what to do with me. So I've got to figure something out. It's just fun right now, but I could see, a couple of months of this, we might have to have some conversations and renegotiations.
Yep. Good.
I think, Lisa, you've had this issue as well. Yeah, you.
Yeah, mine's kind of in the reverse. My husband retired 2 years ago, and we were putting our house in Boxborough on the market, and I was still here working at the company, and he dove into the sale of the house and doing the staging and loading the pods and all that stuff. Felt extremely lucky. So then we moved to a lake house in Spencer, and he has turned himself into a primo house husband. He takes care of the dishes. And previously it was never, we had our primary duties, he's outside, I'm inside, but not that strict of gender lines, if you know what I mean. Now he's like, if I pick up a dish, he's like, no, that's my job. Leave it there. Don't touch it. He manages the cleaning people when they come over. We have several guest bedrooms. We love to have people over. So we have the routine of, after guests have been there, you have to flip the room and change the sheets and wash the sheets and all that stuff. He takes care of all that. And in the beginning, it was really difficult for me because I would say, I would actually not be confident that he had actually washed the sheets and made the bed, and also, laundered the towels for that guest room. And I'm sure there was at least 2 times when I re-stripped, re-washed, and did a bed that he had already done, just to be absolutely sure that it was done. So now I'm learning, like, hey, I'm a spoiled princess these days. Not always. I'm sure once I retire, there will be the kinds of renegotiation that you all are talking about. But for now, I get to focus on my company. I get to focus on my work. When I have downtime, it's downtime. When we have vacation, it's vacation, and he's like minding the home front. I'm a lucky girl.
I would like to get back to the hobby question, but I'd also like to hear some of the younger people on the call, like Devin or Zoe. What are your thoughts about this discussion, and how do you relate to this, Zoe?
Well, yeah, it's been very interesting, I have to say, because I'm still, I would say, earlier on in my journey, but thinking ahead. And that's why I wanted to be on this call, because just thinking, you always want to have your end in mind and figure out where you're going. You don't want to be that guy that just wakes up in another 20 years and like, you don't want to, like, I know so many people that they just run their business until they can't work anymore, until they don't have any life left anymore, because they're not thinking about their future. So that's why, like, it's one of the things that I think I got out of it too, is your business isn't an end in and of itself. It shouldn't be. At least that's what I think. I mean, going back to what Ryan said, I do feel very passionate about what I do, and I love what I do. And I wake up every morning and I'm very happy to be doing what I'm doing. But at some point, I know that that's going to change, and there's going to be another stage of life, and just planning for that.
Right. Good. Thank you. That's all we needed to get across. And I think you know, this conversation will continue throughout the roundtables. And I just want it to be a thing. I want it to be on your radar. Some of you are very close to it, some of you not so much, but it is something that's important, and to understand that our business is there to serve us, and not the other way around.
I would say I read the book 4,000 Weeks, A Human Scale Guide to Time Management. And so I started to write every year on my planner book, right on the cover of it. I wrote, if I live to average life expectancy, how many more weeks I have left. So, a year ago it was 1,000 weeks, and now it's 52 weeks less than that. And so the idea that, like Zoe is talking about, that at some point he'll have to be focused on this. It happens in the blink of an eye. You go from being the young buck to being the old guy, and you don't feel it because it happens a little bit at a time every day, and then all of a sudden, you recognize it. It happens fast, and so having some thought about the amount of sand left in the hourglass isn't a bad motivator.
Amen.
I wrote that book down, Dan, by the way. I have it right here in my books to read list. I went to go add it, and I realized I already had it down, and I had your name next to it that you read.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, but that sounds like an amazing book.
It's a good premise. It's a book like a lot of books written by consultants. It probably was a good talk, and but it was motivating for me.
20 pages stretched out to 200.
Yeah.
That's what Blinkist is for, I suppose.
That's this book. I kind of sense that we're coming to the end of the conversation. I would like to ask if anybody has something they haven't said that they'd like to say, or a question that they haven't asked.
I guess
Go ahead.
No, Devin, you go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, as somebody who's just coming through this kind of I'm on the total opposite side of this kind of spectrum. I actually just acquired, I think most of you know, I acquired the agency, the marketing agency MarketVantage from Hans about a year ago now. One of the nuggets that I loved coming out of this conversation was, don't wait until a successful exit to do the things that you want to do. And I think, especially coming out of let's call it a tumultuous 2024 at best. I think from a couple different perspectives, not related to, you know, the transition with Hans specifically, but just the general market conditions, as well as, you know, getting my feet under me as a new CEO. There was a lot of things that I found great value in that helped improve me, both, you know, on the pitch of business as well as off the pitch. So doing a lot of like regular exercising, a lot of, you know, just quiet times in the mornings, like getting good dedicated time with my wife, like all things that were just incredibly beneficial that I didn't need to wait until, you know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, you know, if there is an exit, which there will be at some point, but just, you know, whatever it is, TBD. You know, I feel like that was an incredibly impactful kind of thing to continue to remember. Like life, we form, the business is what we want it to be, and nothing is stopping us from kind of living a bit of the life that we want to have now, while we run a business and while we're being CEOs and making big decisions. So I think that was a big lesson, both practically learning last year as well as, again, being reminded here today. But I will say I was also very just encouraged to hear about, you know, this and taking mental notes, because, you know, at some point I will be exiting, and there's going to need to be a transition period for me as well. So all good things to be remembering.
Great. Thank you, Devin. Lisa?
Before we break up, I'd kind of like to return to the hobbies conversation, because you know, I don't know how many years away. I'm starting to think about my exit in no less than 2 years, but you know, I'm a little apprehensive. 2 years may go by, and I've been so involved in preparing the business for sale that things are humming so beautifully. I'll be like, hey, well, why leave now? But anyway, that's something to be conquered when I come to it. But whenever I think about retirement, you know, people say, oh, you know, you're going to go crazy, you'd be so bored. Well, I have a fiber arts hobby. I have spinning wheels, looms, many skeins of yarn. I have a beautiful yard. I love to garden, and, you know, all this stuff. And I'm always and we love to travel. So I'm always thinking, these are the things I will be busy every day doing all these things. Right. And I'm just curious to hear, I mean, I'm getting a little bit of a sense from people that, you know, I know, especially for Ryan and Dan, you guys wanted to keep your finger in the business, in some type of business environment, enterprise activity. You know, maybe I might do some community service type stuff if I feel the need, but I'm just curious to know, like, did you finally get to do the hobbies, and then after a little while go, okay, I've been there, done that. Like, it wasn't as great as you thought it was going to be. Like, I know Hans spends a lot of time on the slopes, on the ski slopes. You know, did you think, Hans, you were going to ski every single day? You're muted.
Yeah, it hasn't quite worked out that way. There's a lot to do, and actually, I'm doing some volunteering with a local senior center. You know, you get, I don't know, I have a hard time saying no, I guess, like some of the guys here, and there's a lot of need. You know, there's a lot of need, so I'm finding plenty to do. So yeah, splitting wood. Yeah, that's the other thing. I heat with wood, so that's pretty time consuming, but it's a good, I don't have to join the fitness center and pay money for that. I can actually, yeah. But yeah, it's yeah, what I'm finding is I thought I was going to get more stuff done than I'm able to get done, because there's a whole lot of distractions and things going on. And I want to be a little more intentional. That's my goal for 2025, because I've sort of allowed myself to get pulled into a whole lot of things in this past year, which are all good, but, you know, I'm I thought I'd have taken a bigger trip by now, done more skiing, all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get bored at all. There's still hobbies on my list. I still have one kid in high school. He's about ready to finish this year. So I've kind of held back a little bit but I have a bunch of plans. I have a bunch of things I want to do. And I keep coming up with like I like to research things. I like to read about stuff on the internet. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. I want to build an off-grid house. You know what I mean? So I start reading. And will I ever do that? I don't know, but it sounds really cool. Like to build some shack, something in the middle of nowhere, and power it with solar or something. And at the very least, it occupies my mind going through the gyrations and writing down the plans and like researching the stuff that I'd buy and looking for property. So I mean, like Hans, you get to like I get distracted by that stuff too, and I'm like, that's cool. That's okay. There was nothing I really had to get done today, and I enjoyed that. So don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
David has been very patient with his hand up. David, what have you got?
Sorry about the video, but for some reason my internet went from 100 megabytes down to 3 this morning, so I gotta deal with that later. What I wanted to ask really is that I don't know if this is the roundtable forum thumbnail. I have 2 companies. One's at $26 million in sales, 6 employees in the Washington, D.C. area. Northern Virginia, there's 1 billion of these type of IT companies. And the other one is a SaaS company that is 12 years old and it's growing by leaps and bounds. Okay, so there's 2 different issues with one issue with each company. With the IT company, I'm looking at advice, help, whatever, in terms of a transition plan. And I have all the things that were brought up about employee, dedication to my employees, or whatever. So that's a concern with me. The other IT company, it's the SaaS company. It probably has a potential to be a $20 million company. I need to find within the next 2 years a CEO from a mom and pop to a multi-million-dollar company and then sell it for 6 times earnings.
David.
And I don't know if this is the right forum to get that kind of advice or not, but those are my questions.
Yep, it's what we do, and I'd be happy to talk to you about finding a group for you. I know Paul there has got his hand up. He's thinking about that too. If you'd like to talk a little bit more about that, we can do that later. And it is very much all about the fit. And if you can find people who are in a similar circumstance to yours, or have had experiences that you expect to have in the future, this is by all means the forum for it. And so be happy to talk.
David has been a regular attendee at the meetings up in Vermont so far. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Good. Paul, what you got?
Yeah, just really listening to this, and I believe I'm further ahead, at least on the chronological.
I have the mergers and acquisition business, and one of the avenues that I'm going to pursue is people that are acquired and the SaaS executive is no longer employed by the new company. He would have a very good feel for their expertise and how they progressed. And so I'm going to explore that, but I'd be interested in advice from anybody.
Good.
David, I think based on the audio troubles we're having with you, this is probably a better conversation to take offline after.
Okay.
All right. Because you're really breaking up even the audio.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, I just reflected. Excellent conversation, and thanks for bringing us together. And Carol, you really set a great framework for it. But it has occurred to me that retirement, the question itself has changed so much in my lifetime. When I was growing up, it really was a binary choice. When do I stop working and when do I retire? And then how many years do I have? And frankly, when I was growing up, Social Security is, basically you didn't live that much longer after that. So you didn't have that big a question. Now we have the opportunity. And frankly, I really do. I mean, first of all, it's a complex question as I'm listening to everybody, because it's not just our transition. selling a company, and then what do I do? It's, you know, it's spouses, the entire family, the friends, the desires on everything else. It's a complex and dynamic question that involves everybody you love and what we want to do. But what so excites me is it's not either or on almost anything. You know, COVID showed that to me more than anything. I went from being able to talk to about 10 CEOs a week to 100 every single week and seeing what was happening. And people are now running companies, you know, that all around the world, they moved and they're still able to participate, engage. And it's not either or anymore. The members I've seen, I mean, frankly, from my own life, last summer, we met with CEOs in Czech and Poland and London and Switzerland, and had a member that retired back to his home country of Vietnam, and we met him for dinner, and he came over here for dinner, and he's still entrepreneurial, looking at starting his next company, even though he's well into his 60s. And it's just, and then even on travel, we love to travel prior to kids, but during kids for 30 years, we couldn't go anywhere exotic, too expensive and too painful going with kids. Now it's wonderful. So we can actually combine our interests even before so-called retirement from business. And even among our CEOs here, I've met some of you folks. I met Scott in person out here in San Francisco before he did the crazy thing and taken over the CEO Roundtable in Boston. But we met in person on the phone. Nowadays we can engage, and then I'm just seeing, you know, Australian CEOs that go to a conference in Charlotte, South Carolina, and all of a sudden meet up with a CEO there they wouldn't met otherwise. We had a CEO in Australia that called me on 4 days' notice and had a layover in LA for 10 hours. Was able to meet another CEO that they not only had a great lunch and great visit that they had never met before, but all of a sudden they have major strategic synergies doing business together. So frankly, I just see a really far more creative and dynamic way for us to think about how we spend our time. Forget retirement, it's just how we spend our time. And so frankly, thanks for putting on the conversation, because it really, I think we're at a place where you can have almost infinite possibilities of how we mix who we want to be. The basic questions Carol put: who do we want to spend time with, and where, and how? But it's not either or, not virtual or in person, it's both. And so anyway, thanks for allowing me to sit in.
Well, thank you for being here, Paul. It's a big tent we have now, and I know some of the stuff that you're working on is working to make it bigger and better. So thank you for that. I'm going to give the last word to Carol, but before I do, I'd like to say that the next all hands is tentatively scheduled for April 22nd. We don't have a topic nailed down. There's lots on the list, but if you have something that you'd like to explore in this kind of forum, let us know, and we'll put that on the list too. Carol, thank you. And thank you both Dan and Ryan and Carol for, I was going to say exposing yourselves, but you know what being transparent and honest about your situations. Carol?
So, well, listen, I've really enjoyed this conversation with all of you, and I will say that, you know, I think designing your life, you hit the nail right on the head. There are no lives that are going to be identical. Each is going to be unique because we're all a product of our experiences, and how we mix and match what we want to do with how we want to do it and who we want to do it with is really going to be different for everyone. And I think that there's great value in being exposed to each other's, you know, approaches, and they will continue to evolve over time. So the transition model that I shared with you, you know, even whenever you decide what your next chapter is going to be, there's going to be additional transitions within that next chapter. So I hope that what you walk away with here is, you know, elevated awareness of, you know, what kinds of things you might expect and different ways you might approach dealing with some of the more challenging parts of transition, and certainly enjoying the ultimate transition of where you want to get to. Now, I know Stephanie was going to send out a handout I prepared, and it includes a little worksheet, if you will, for those of you who maybe aren't quite ready to take the deep dive into designing that new chapter, but only have time for a transition plan. I put in a little worksheet for a transition planner, just food for thought, so you have a takeaway to think about from time to time. But I want to thank all of you for welcoming me here, and I it sounds like it was of value. So that makes all things good for me today. It makes it rewarding for me. So thank you.
And you have, I'm sure you're available to anybody on a one-on-one basis, and you have a course that I wish that I could have attended, that you'll probably run again.
Yeah.
Explore this with other couples who are going through these transitions. So
yeah, absolutely. One-on-one, couples, or even small groups.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You had your hand up. Was it the final word?
Yeah, the final word is that I fixed my internet connection. This is what I look like, everybody.
Much better than
Well done.
Yeah. That's a good advertisement for your business. That's good. Thank you all, and continue the dialogue and stay warm.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great time. We'll see you next time.